anytime I'm talking to library people, anytime that I'm talking to library folks about ebooks, I learn something new. And collectively, I think most groups of librarians actually know quite a lot about ebooks, but feel very confused individually. I find that when I'm talking to librarians, they'll say, I feel like I don't have a handle on this, and I don't know what's going on, and it's hard to make decisions, there's so much information. And then when we actually sit down and start talking, actually people really have a pretty good handle on it in a lot of ways, but often feel overwhelmed by it anyway, which I can relate to. I'm in the middle of writing a book about ebooks for Libraries Unlimited, and some days I just want it to stop. Like, I want all the news about ebooks to stop. All the tweets, just stop talking about ebooks for 2 minutes and let me finish this. But every day there's something new. But that's the nature of the beast. My other motivation for talking about ebooks today, besides the fact that it's all I think about, is a little bit selfish. Next week I'm on a panel at the Digital Book World Conference. DBW is a publishing conference, and on the last day, it overlaps a little bit with midwinter, so the last day that doesn't overlap with midwinter, there's a library track, and that's very exciting. They're including libraries as a whole track. I guess my understanding is last year there was a library session, but this year there's a series of sessions, and it is very much a publishing conference. When I actually saw the price to attend, speakers get to go free, and when I actually saw the price to attend, I was like, oh yes, not for librarians, got it. And since I'll be one of the few librarians there, I really wanted to make sure that I'm representing as many people's experiences and perspectives as I can. And I talk to a lot of Connecticut librarians all the time. We're the largest consortium in the state, and I'm on a bunch of statewide committees and things like that, so I end up talking to a lot of different people. So this is exciting for me to hear from a group. Outside of Connecticut, you guys are mostly Georgia, I understand, although I saw Texas go by. So I'm excited to talk to you all about your experiences a little bit so that I can represent that more accurately to publishers next week. Okay, so discovery. And I wanted to focus on discovery in part because that's what my talk is about next week, and I'm trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but also because I actually think it's something librarians really live and breathe, but it's a big issue to publishers. I was surprised is a strong word, but I was interested to see that that was what the publishers wanted us to talk about. That was what the topic for I'm on a panel with publishers, librarians. It's moderated by Heather McCormack from Library Journal. And the publishers are really interested in discovery. How do we get people to discover new books or old books or any books? Word of mouth is still very much the primary way that people learn about new books. A friend tells them, they walk into a bookstore, they walk into a library, somebody helps them pick out their next read. And a few months ago, I interviewed Madeline McIntosh from Random House about libraries and publishing. And one of the questions I had asked her was about the HarperCollins model. I asked her about the books that expire after a certain number of circulations, and how is that, does that work for publishers? Why are more publishers not doing that? Or do we think more publishers are going to do that? Just because it's, to us, it seems like a terrible, terrible model, but then I thought, well, if HarperCollins is doing this, are more publishers not following suit because they don't think libraries are important, or are they not following suit because they don't think that model is going to work for them? How does that look from the publishing perspective? And she said, and this is a longish quote, but I think it's worth the whole quote. So her response was, this goes back to the question of balancing reader and author interests. Whatever the future looks like, we want a model that will ensure continued support for physical books in physical libraries in local communities. That's crucial for us. And in turn, publishers can support a library's desire to provide digital content for their patrons. We understand the pressure that librarians are under, and we want to work with you. We also want to be honest about the fact that for us, the heart of what makes a library important is defined by physical books in a physical space connected to its community by face-to-face relationships and coming together in person over books. The value of a library to us and our authors is inextricably linked to a library having a physical space where people can come and discover books. So I saw a lot of blog posts and tweets from people who were really unhappy about this. And I should say the interview that I did was over email. It wasn't a back and forth. I sent the questions and then she responded. And I was totally fascinated by that response because there wasn't a way for me to ask her, could you elaborate on that a little bit? because people were unhappy that she was focusing on the physical library, and they felt like that was outdated, and they felt like that was not really getting what libraries were in the 21st century and all of that. And we want to push our services beyond being a big book warehouse. I mean, that's what we're interested in expanding our brand, as it were. But I think it's sort of a mistake to read that as publishers just don't understand libraries. She's really being upfront here about what publishers' interests are. The heart of what makes a library important is defined by physical books in a physical space connected to its community by face-to-face relationships and coming together in person over books. They want people to be connecting over books, and the way that discovery works best so far, that everybody knows about, is that face-to-face relationship. And the rest of what she said, the value of a library to us and our authors is inextricably linked to a library having a physical space where people can come and discover books. So discovery is incredibly important to publishers. And truthfully, it's important to us. I think often, I don't want to say that we don't think about it as librarians, because I think we do, but I think it's so built into what we're doing every day that we don't think about it as problematic in any way. But for publishers, it is how they're going to get their product out there, and how they're going to get people connected to their authors and to their stories. So, sorry, I'm using two computers, so sometimes I'm going back and forth between my notes and the slides. So online, and this is a picture actually of a very large library in Scotland, and I'd hesitate to call something so gorgeous a book warehouse, and it really was beautiful, and I wasn't supposed to take pictures, so this was a covert picture, which is why it's a little bit, I really wanted to get the whole dome, but I couldn't without them seeing me. So, and this is also, community center seems almost a little too small for something this grandiose. I didn't see the comments. It was a stealth picture. I felt very naughty, like bad librarian breaking somebody else's rules. So we are a connection engine. That's what we do. We connect people with books. We connect people with information, of course. And yeah, the easiest way right now for people to do that in a lot of ways is in that sort of, warehouse is a terrible term, but in that sort of book place model where you go in and walk around and look at books or hand them to people. So online, we don't really have that same physical model and that same sense of browsing and looking at materials. Slate's tech columnist, and his name is Farhad Manjoo, and he is, by the by, a really great tech columnist. He wrote a column arguing that we should just let indie bookstores close and buy our books on Amazon. And he's a really great tech columnist, and then I thought, well, maybe I don't want to talk about books with you. He was roundly condemned, of course, by authors and booksellers alike. For authors, that was just a ridiculous thing to say, that that Amazon is somehow maintaining literary culture and better than an independent bookstore is. Another part of his argument was that Amazon is actually putting money back into the economy, into the local economy, better than an independent bookstore, and better than other independent enterprises, because a bookstore is selling the same thing everywhere. If you're buying the Steve Jobs biography, you're getting the same product whether you get it from Amazon or your local independent. Which, I get his point, but I used to live in a place that had a ton of independent bookstores, and you were not getting the same thing in every single place. And you definitely were not getting, you definitely were not getting just, a product. You weren't getting it wasn't a commodity. There's something to be said for a well-edited collection. So, but the part that was interesting to me in terms of discovery, and this is another quote from his article, a physical store, whether it's your favorite indie or humongous Barnes & Noble at the mall, offers a relatively paltry selection, no customer reviews, no reliable way to find what you're looking for, and a dubious recommendation engine. Amazon suggests books based on others you've read. Your local store recommends what the employees like. If you don't choose your movies based on what the guy at the box office recommends, why would you choose your books that way? So, you know, I'm not even going to get into the difference between like the guy at the box office and a dedicated bookseller. You know, I think librarians have quite a bit in common with indie booksellers in particular, and really with booksellers in general. And this is a bit of an aside here. I don't have this in my notes, but I always think of Borders used to have this unbelievable, legendary test to work there. And I knew a woman in college who had worked at Borders, and she said it was impossible to pass. I mean, obviously people did because they worked there, and she had passed it herself. But it was page after page of, you know, authors and plot lines of books, and, you know, if somebody's looking for this, where would you look in the store, and all that stuff. It was notoriously difficult because they wanted to make sure that they got people who were really devoted to books and to reading. So, you know, it's not necessarily, although bookstore jobs traditionally don't pay well, it isn't usually just, you know, people who just have any old job. This is a specific, it's a career for a lot of people. And actually, for that matter, I would not be surprised if you would find serious film buffs singing popcorn in an indie theater. And in general, I just thought that was snobby and classist. But Amazon's recommendations are just not that good. It doesn't recommend based on what we've read. It recommends based on what we buy. And I bought I bought my nephew some Lego City books, and that is all Amazon wants to talk to me about. I bought them in mid-December. I get at least a weekly email from them asking me if I want to buy more Lego City books, or perhaps some Legos, or perhaps some other Lego City related things. I am terribly tired of the Lego emails, and I'm just seeing Steve's comment. Yeah, if he is going to a store where they're only recommending what they like, then they're doing it wrong, and that's absolutely true. One of the things that I like about independent bookstores is they have that Indie Reads, or Indie Bound. Sorry, it used to be, years ago it was called Indie Reads. Now it's called Indie Bound, and you know they do have like, here's what a bunch of independent booksellers are recommending this month, and often it's really a great read, and it may not be something, you know, I'm interested in that month or whatever, but it's often something that maybe hasn't gotten the attention from, say, the big review, you know, article. You know, it's not necessarily reviewed in the New York Times, but it is a really great way to get attention to a title. And I do love when they have, and I wish more libraries would do this, you know, staff picks by name. So it'll be like, here's what Steve likes this week, and it'll be like a shelf of just Steve's favorite things, or a shelf of just, you know, Tessa's favorite books this week, or whatever, and you can, you know, that's clearly curated by the staff of the store. So yeah, I mean, you're getting, to some extent, there's that piece where you get what they like, but that helps build that relationship, and that isn't necessarily what you would get if you said to the person, I like this book, do you think I would like this other book? So, and I know, by the way, that there is a way to go into Amazon and tell them that this was a gift and please stop talking to me about Legos. Although, you know, I like Legos. Every week, Amazon. But I can't quite get behind that. I know it's possible, but I really feel like going into Amazon and editing my consumer metadata so that I can sort of build a better product for them. And additionally, so they can know even more about me. Amazon really, they know quite enough about me. Thank you. I'm not necessarily interested in giving them more information about me. And also, I'm not necessarily interested in doing a lot of work for something that's still not going to be as good as my local librarian. So really good book recommendations, they come from the relationships we build. We build them with other readers, whether they're friends or librarians or booksellers. And I feel like I've been talking about the shortcomings on Amazon. People who bought this also bought that, their little algorithm, for years. When Library Things for Libraries launched, I talked about it all the time. Because I talked about how Library Things recommendations they're much better than Amazon's. In part because that's based on what people have read and rated and their response to that book and what they own. You know, it looks at people's libraries, at what they like and what they don't like, and that's actually really useful. I mean, and additionally, you know, Library Things for Libraries has this tag structure that's built off of Library Things tags, which I find incredibly useful. And I know whenever I've gotten you know, I know the book was about this, I think, kind of, and it had a red cover, you know, one of those questions. The red cover part, nobody can really help you with. But I tend to go to librarything.com before I go to Amazon, because Amazon's really great if you spelled the title wrong, but it's not really great if you have no idea what the title is and you read it 10 years ago and you think it was kind of about a girl in the woods, but maybe not. And maybe she had a dog, but maybe she had a cat, and so that, you know, I end up going to librarything.com and searching tags based on what patrons have told me, and I've had much better luck with that, in part because that was, you know, that's how people who've actually read the book and put that information in there, and it's all driven by passion. You know, Amazon is driven by sales, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want to denigrate, you know, or we shouldn't be interested in making money. It's great that people make money off of books. All the more power to them. But, you know, Library Things data is driven off of people's passion for that book, which is why that data is better than Amazon's, in my humble opinion. Or not so humble about that. I feel really sure that I'm right. Okay, so, and yeah, Amazon has everything under the sun. And, you know, I get what he's saying. A paltry selection feels a little bit insulting. But, you know, that isn't the be-all and end-all of discovery. You know, and we know this, when we read, our circulation improves because editing helps people see what's there. You know, and last year at ALA Midwinter, it was in San Diego, and I happened to get there 2 days early, and I went up to this, I was in, I don't remember the name of the town. That was good. I should have written that down. But it was La Jolla, I think, in the La Jolla area. I went to this bookstore. It was a little independent bookstore, and really, yeah, they didn't have every book imaginable because it was a tiny, tiny place. But it was really striking how well edited their collection was, and how much thought they had given to it, and how much it clearly reflected the interests of the community. And, you know, libraries have that too. When you go into a library, yeah, okay, everybody's going to have the latest James Patterson. We're all going to buy that. That's fine. But you can really see in a well-edited collection what the community is interested in. And that's something, working for a consortium, prior to this I've only worked for standalone libraries. And now that I work at a consortium, I can really start to see that difference in collection at sort of a macro level. And we brought in, part of my job here is we're bringing in small libraries to be part of our Evergreen network. And we found that, this is just anecdotal, but I think this is broadly true. One day I was talking with one of our new libraries, and they said, you know, we looked because we went to add this book and nobody else has it. And I said, yeah, so you have it, so you just request the record, and, you know, because we share a catalog when we centralize cataloging. And they said, but I don't understand, how could nobody else have this book? They're so popular. And I said, well, you know, maybe you guys, it's popular here in your little town, and it's not as popular in other places. And they were really, I mean, they were sort of taken aback. It was a small library in a relatively small town. And, you know, who would have thought this particular, I think it was a romance series, was wildly popular with their patrons and not wildly popular in other places. So there is, you know, oh yeah, sorry, Evergreen's ILS software. So, which most of you, I think, are aware of, Georgia. So, you know, those collections, you know, we see that in our library collections, you know, and for those of you who are in the larger sort of Evergreen network in Georgia, I'm sure you can see it. You know, there are those libraries where it's like, okay, everybody here really likes, you know, X author. My last library, Trollope, had to have all the Trollope. People were really big into the Trollope, and I kept going, really? Really? For whatever reason, that was their deal. You know, and it becomes an interesting piece of information about that community, and as the library that's connected to that community, that's what you do. You buy for that community. You, oh, audio, sorry. I'm probably moving my head is really the problem, because I have to pretend I'm talking to people, so I'm actually doing all of the talking to people hand gestures, even though I'm sitting in a room by myself. So, you know what your community loves, and that is that is an important part of discovery, and that is an important part of encouraging discovery, is knowing how to buy for your people. Okay, so the other thing that Amazon shows us, and that's what this slide was about, is that discovery online is incredibly hard. So here I am complaining about Amazon's discovery. I don't like it. I don't like their, things that you might like, algorithm. And they're an enormous company, and they have all of these resources to make online discovery work. I mean, think about what their coding staff must be like. It's got to be unbelievable. So it's got to be really hard. And I'm not here to say we have to compete with Amazon. I will say that several times because I don't want people to feel like I'm saying, well, Amazon can't do it, so to heck with it. What happens when we're dealing with a mostly ebook ecosystem? So I'm just going to pause here and do a little numbers party, because I said mostly ebook ecosystem, and I know that is maybe not necessarily true or not necessarily going to happen tomorrow. And I'm not somebody who thinks print is dead. But I want to talk a little bit about the statistics on ebooks. So ebook sales are steadily rising. We know this. In 2010, ebooks were 8.3% of revenue for larger publishing houses. In 2011, that number was nearly 20%. So, whoa, I mean, that's more than doubling. That's huge. In September 2011, 15% of Americans own an e-reader. So that number seems really small, I know, and I think it seems small, particularly to librarians, because we're used to looking at the whole picture of people. Like 15% of Americans, well, whatever, there's 85% that don't have e-readers, so what about them? Well, what about them? It's really a sizable chunk of the book buying public. Fewer than half of all Americans purchase a book in a typical year. We are used to thinking about what everybody's doing, and that's, sure, print is still dominant. But the 15% that have that e-reader, those are our hardcore readers. If only half of Americans are buying books on a regular basis, and by regular I mean once a year, and 15% of Americans have an e-reader, it's suddenly a much bigger number. These are the people, they're people who are never going to buy an e-reader because they just don't read much. They're just, why would you buy a device dedicated to an activity you don't do? I will likely never buy an automatic marshmallow roaster. So there are plenty of people who will never buy an e-reader, and these people maybe aren't coming to the library anyway, and maybe they are. Maybe they're coming in and they're borrowing DVDs or using our computers or whatever, but they certainly weren't buying books to begin with. So Library Journal released that patron profile survey. They released parts of it publicly, and then other parts you had to buy the patron profiles for, which I have to say, if your library can get its hands on the patron profile, completely fascinating. Really, really, really interesting. So ebook patrons, they found, read more, use all library services more, they use the library's website more, they use the Wi-Fi and databases more, they check out movies and audiobooks more than non-ebook patrons, and they're increasingly loyal to the ebook format. So anecdotally, I think librarians have seen this. I talked to our libraries. I'm sorry, I just got distracted by Kathleen's question. I don't know, but I will try and find out for you. So anecdotally, I think we've seen this. I work in the basement of a library, and upstairs, the people upstairs, I was chatting with them about one of their favorite bestest patrons who comes in all the time, and then one day she just vanished, and they were really worried. Like, did she fall? did she fall down a well? Where did she go? But it turns out she got a Kindle, and she stopped coming to the library for a really long time. And then she came back because apparently her husband said that you have to stop buying all these books and please go back to the library and just read print, just deal with it. Or you have a friend who gets an iPad and suddenly says she's reading more. So the numbers don't seem big, but these are our people. I mean, these are our people who are our users, our heaviest users, and they're the ones buying e-readers. And just quickly for some international flavor, the U.S. has seen a much higher rate of adoption of e-readers in other parts of the world. In the U.K., it's 3.7% of the population has either a tablet or an e-reader. In Australia, it's only 0.9%. And I got these numbers, by the way, from the international numbers from ifbookofm.com. It's a little bit harder for me to find. It found it a little bit harder to find international numbers, so they had them. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apple are all U.S.-based companies, and their products have all been rolled out in the United States first. Other market factors like that, which in the UK, that applies to the tax applies to ebooks, but not printed books. So pricing strategy, all of that, all plays a role. So America is sort of ebook heavy. Okay, and the other thing I want to draw your attention to is the 80% ebook market. Okay, this is sort of a long quote, but Mike Shaskin is a publishing consultant, and his company is actually putting together the Digital Book World Conference that I mentioned at the beginning. His blog is totally fascinating. It's idealog.com. And I recommend it for getting a non-library perspective on all of this. And he doesn't work at a publishing company, so he sort of has a really interesting take on what's going on with ebooks, what's going on in publishing, because he's connected to it, he knows about it, but he isn't invested in publishing the way publishers are, per se. So anyway, he is really interesting, and in October, he wrote a couple of posts about getting to an 80% ebook market in the next 2 to 5 years. Which, I mean, every time I read it, I kind of have to go, okay, this will be okay. He's talking about a percentage of sales at publishing houses and not the absolute number of books. And he's limiting himself to straight text, not illustrated books or anything fancy like that. He says, I interpret 20%, because we're at 20% of Big Six sales revenue, to mean something closer to 25% of units sold, because ebooks bring in substantially less revenue per copy sold than print on major hardcover books, although they can bring in a bit more on paperbacks. But many books were not yet ebookable. Most juveniles and illustrated books are not represented in that figure, so I don't think it's a stretch to figure that ebooks are constituting 30% of units sold for straight narrative text. So that's kind of intense. I mean, every time like I said, I've read these blog posts several times now, and every single time I go, wow. And you know, I don't know if he's right. Certainly, he talks about people disagree with him, publishers disagree with him on this, but I think it's worth considering. So when I'm talking about discovery in an ebook world, it's something we're all going to have to figure out. Right now, I think a lot of what we end up talking about is specific to our vendors. One of the best pieces of ebook buying advice that I've heard, and I think this was from Christopher Platt at NYPL, said to buy ebooks in small batches, since Overdrive shows patrons what's been purchased recently. Small batches keeps that list of new stuff fresh. It keeps regular borrowers interested. But that's so Overdrive specific, and it's also not what we're great at. I mean, we can buy books, we're good at that, sure. But what we're really good at is reader's advisory. Douglas County in Colorado is doing incredibly cool stuff with their ebooks. They've gotten a lot of attention because they're working directly with publishers, and they're providing ebooks through the library. They have their own Adobe DRM. It's the same thing that Overdrive uses, but they're running their own Adobe server for that, and it is a little bit more streamlined from what I understand than the Overdrive process. And they're downloading the books directly from the library catalog, which is very cool. They have a Viewfind, and they are using that to unify the whole library experience. I'll be curious to see what happens with publishers for that. They've gotten a lot of smaller publishers. They started with the Colorado Independent Publishing Association, and I don't see any of the Big Six going for that, but we'll see. Maybe they will. But ultimately, it's really great to see a library-driven solution. But I think, they've gotten a lot of attention for that. But Monique, I think you pronounce her last name Sendez. I always say it wrong. Every time I meet her, I have to remind myself how to pronounce her last name, and I forget, which is just my personal albatross of a name pronunciation. Gave a presentation at Library Journal's Power to the Patron Summit, or not the Power to the Patron, the earlier summit, the ebook summit. And she talked about what they have called a power wall. So cool. It's a physical power wall when you first walk into their library that's basically like a display on steroids. It's amazing. And she had pictures of it, which I could not steal, I didn't want to steal them. But go and find her slides somewhere. And there's a physical power wall when you walk into their branches. It's this huge display area. that you see when you first walk in, and they said that 60% of their circulation comes from the Powerwall. They've made a digital equivalent for it, and it's like a big touch screen that patrons can browse for ebooks, which I really like because it has that tactileness to it. You know, we wander around bookstores and libraries, so physical things that recreate that ambling sense of looking around really appeal to me, and I think they appeal to a lot of readers. And again, this is anecdotal, but that's the sort of stuff that that people, I think, talk about when they talk about what they don't like about ebooks. Even if they're ebook readers, they do talk. I've talked to lots of people, and again, it is all anecdotal, that talk about missing that sort of milling around little stacks and finding something. So, and one of the things that I like about Library Think for Libraries and Library Think generally and sites like that is that sort of rabbit hole of clicking. I like that sense of getting lost a little bit. And I haven't seen the Powerwalls in the flesh, but I'm guessing that they have that quality of just sort of paging around looking at different books. So back to that Reader's Advisory. Libraries are all about community, connections, relationships with our patrons. So how do we bring that into the digital world? You know, we've done a lot with things like embedding chat widgets for things that are reference related. I don't know if we can extend that to book discovery. I know my experience with IM as a reference has been there. I will occasionally get questions that say, you know, I liked this. Do you think what else should I read? But it's a harder interface to do that in. But I don't think it's impossible. But how do we foster that word of mouth with people who aren't coming in to talk to us? And the other piece of this is, you know, how do we prove the value of our role in discovery to the rest of the world? You know, publishers right now are viewing library lending as lost sales when it comes to ebooks, and we're still finding ways to prove ourselves in the print world. You know, to say, you know, our discovery mechanisms have value, and ebooks are in many ways a whole new ball game. And I know for librarians that seems weird because we tend to think of it like, you know, it's a book. You read the book. However, the format isn't as relevant, or it is relevant, but the format isn't necessarily relevant to discovery. It would seem, but that's because, you know, we're offering similar content electronically and print-wise. In fact, we're offering more print because we can't offer everything electronically. But consumer behavior has actually really changed. People are happy buying nothing but 99-cent ebooks on Amazon, and they're eschewing the things from the major publishers. So that makes big publishers understandably nervous. So that is, I mean, I think that's where a lot of people have said to me, I don't understand how a publisher can view a library circulation as a lost sale. It's not that way in print. Why would it be that way in ebooks? And, you know, my gut instinct and my experience in libraries says, yeah, why is that different? That's ridiculous. But I think for publishers, there's this whole other layer of things, you know, like the Amazon 99-cent bin. And, you know, people will buy self-published stuff and be happy with it, and not be willing to spend the money on books from major publishers, or even, and, you know, I'm saying Big Six a lot, but this holds true for a lot of medium-sized publishers, maybe less true for smaller publishers, where they can maybe be more flexible on things like price. So we do, I mean, as furious as we get when a big publisher won't work with libraries or changes the terms under which they work with libraries, I do think that's at least partially why. And, you know, one of the things for me that I find frustrating or maybe infuriating is that, you know, we're one of their biggest cheerleaders. Librarians are out there, we're talking up their product, we're making sales happen. You know, we're not talking up the stuff in the 99-cent bin on Amazon usually. We're happy to talk about, you know, things on the bestseller list, or things that are just off the bestseller list, or things that we think should be on the bestseller list. And we're making sales happen in a lot of ways, but we haven't proved that, and now everything's changing. So the last thing I want to talk about just real quickly about is data. One of the things that Amazon has, excuse me, sorry, is a whole lot of data. And that's what they use to create their mediocre lists of people who bought this, also bought that. And libraries are traditionally really uncomfortable using patron data anyway. And that's, you know, I get that. So, maybe we shouldn't be using Patron Data to create those sorts of lists. Maybe that is following in Amazon's footsteps too much. I don't think we should try and compete with Amazon, because I think, A, they're enormous, and B, we're better at different stuff. And we're better than Amazon at different stuff. We're certainly better at reader's advisory and building those. I know I keep saying building those connections, building those relationships, but really, truly, think about the relationships you have with your patrons. They don't have that kind of relationship with Amazon. And if we can't find ways to have that one-on-one contact with online patrons, embedding real likes, other suggestions into our online experience. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities there where we can really use what we know, our own expertise, to create that discovery experience online. This is my last slide. Libraries are human institutions, and I mean that in that they're made up of humans, but also that they are about sort of our humanity. And what we do is we connect and we create community. And more than any online retailer, we do make those connections through books and information. I know there's we don't want to be sort of beating the book horse to death here, and we are obviously about more than just books, but I'm talking about ebooks. So we're talking largely about books, and to a greater or lesser extent, that OCLC perception study always shows that books are our brand, and that keeps becoming more true. And I'm not saying we shouldn't also show the other things that we can do, but it's not a terrible brand to have. Books are pretty great, and ebooks are pretty great, and that can certainly be an extension of our brand. But our collective task over the next few years is to sort of bring that warmth and that expertise fully into the digital world. And I do wish that today's webinar was more like, here's the answer, here are some really awesome ideas that we can do in 20 minutes and everybody should do them. And they'll be really cheap too. But I don't have that solution, and I don't want to pretend that I do. And I wanted to close this out just by encouraging you all to think about how you encourage discovery in your work and how you can translate that into an online ebook system. And also to remind people that we're discovery engines. I mean, we are word-of-mouth machines, and that has value, and that has a unique place in people's lives. So not to be all too touchy-feely about it, but I do think that there should be some warm fuzzies about what libraries do, and that it's important. And I think that there are ways to translate this online, and we haven't necessarily run out of options or run out of ways to keep trying that. So I would encourage you all to go back to your libraries and really think about how great everybody is and how great you all are, and what an important role you play in your community, and how to bring that role online. So that's me. Oh, and those are all the ways you can contact me, on Twitter or email or whatever.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was really interesting. And I have a couple of questions that I've been trying to get in the chat. But if anybody notices that I missed one of your questions, let me know again in the chat. The first one is from Michael Henry Starks, and he asked this question when you were talking about library data being driven by passion, and he's wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, maybe what kinds of library data you see as being driven by our passion.
Oh, sure. Well, I mostly was thinking about librarything.com in terms of how, the data that's in there, the tags, the reviews, all that stuff. But that was sort of the data I was talking about, and what I mean is, the people who are cataloging their own books online, and this is true for Goodreads, Shelfari, I mean, any of those sort of online sites. I use LibraryThing because it's the one I'm familiar with, and the one I've spent the most time on. But it's people have read these books, they feel really strongly about them, they are actually taking the time to catalog their own stuff, which is sort of the surprise of all of this is that people secretly want to be catalogers, and they want. But part of how that works, part of how you get people to do that is you're not just saying, here, catalog this stack of books because it's your job, but it's we're saying that people catalog the things that they've loved, that they've read, and I think we see a lot of that online. Certainly things like Flickr, you're dealing with your own stuff to some extent. If you're using a photograph sharing site or anything like that, you're managing your own material. But we can certainly. I think you can see some of that, I guess, in a library. Our own, our circ data is our circ data, and that's a little bit drier. But you know what your community loves. You certainly know, and you know what your staff has loved, and you know what your biggest readers have loved. All of the libraries I work with, I've seen them all do this, where they set a book aside and say, oh, you know what, so and so will completely love this book. I'm just going to pull this off the shelf for her and give her a call because she usually comes in on Tuesdays, and I'll ask her if she's interested in this one or whatever. That sort of passion is enormous, and to know what your patrons are going to really go nuts for. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks. Also, we have a question from Beth, who asks if anyone is tracking audiobook purchases or downloads towards overall book consumption. Do you know about anybody doing anything in that area?
Ooh, that is a really good question. I don't off the top of my head, but I will see if I can find out. If it's possible to email me the questions like this where I'm like, I don't know, I can certainly try and find out, and I can either send them to that person or I can tweet them or whatever I find out. But I don't know, and that is a really good question, because certainly, audiobooks are a huge business. I know that much, but I don't know if that's getting counted towards other sales data.
It just so happens that I have a little list that I'm working on here called Questions to Research for Later and Send Out an Informational Email. So we have 2 on that list, and we'll get those to Kate, and we will try to get links for you that we send out in the follow-up email, but if we can't get it in time, we will put it on our website. Okay, so next question, Kate. Elizabeth Mason says that she thinks it's sad that only half of the American public reads a book a year. She reads like 2 to 3 books a month. She's wondering if you have any thoughts on maybe what's stopping people from reading. Do you have any kind of philosophy on that?
It's funny, we were just talking about this at work today. One of my coworkers was saying, she's a small child and she doesn't have as much time to read as she used to, and and she feels sort of librarian guilt about that, and that she should somehow be demonstrating reading to her kid, but of course her kid can't quite read yet, so most of the reading she does with her kid is reading to her kid. And I of course was like, you're reading to your kid, that's great, that's what you're supposed to do. But that's, some people just full stop aren't readers, and that's, my parents just bought kayaks. I think it's great that they become kayakers, but, they're never going to be whitewater kayakers. Okay, and, at the same time, I sort of feel like, well, those are 2 totally different things, and everybody should read. But I do think, some of it is just that there is a certain level of work associated with it. Certainly, I don't know a lot of non-readers, so it's hard for me to say. I feel sort of like I'm, guessing. I know I did have a childhood friend who was not a reader, and never became a reader. It just wasn't. She felt like it was hard, and she didn't like it. And that's, certainly. I've seen somebody who says they mostly read audiobooks. Oh my gosh, yes, love audiobooks. And I personally feel that audiobooks totally count as reading, in part because I don't know if this is just the way I process information, but literally I often cannot remember if I read it on paper or listened to it on an audiobook. and I've actually gotten confused, like going through my books going, I thought I read this and I had it here the other day, and then I go, oh right, it was, or oh, it was a podcast or whatever. Oh, I listened to it in an audiobook. But I do think there's a certain extent of work required. And I don't know. I agree with you, and part of me does feel sad about that, and part of me says, okay, that's not what people are going to be into. And I think it can be a slippery slope sometimes. Like, well, maybe then we might be sad if they read the wrong kinds of books, or maybe then we might be. Yeah, and it's a good point, Tessa. It is an opportunity. I think people are often surprised that reading can be sort of fun and enjoyable because they haven't found the right books yet, which maybe gets you back to discovery.
Yes, excellent. I completely agree. Let's see. We've got another question from Michael Henry Starks. He is, and actually I think that somebody else had a similar question, so I'm kind of going to combine these. He's curious about if there have been any studies done that show that libraries are more successful or effective at reader's advisory than Amazon. And I think that I'm trying to give everybody credit for their questions, but I can't find the other person who asked a very similar question. So.
Gosh, I wish. I don't think there have been any studies on that. That would be very cool. The word of mouth thing is sort of just accepted. And I was just thinking about this as I said it out loud. I thought, I have no idea what that's just what everybody says. It's one of those truisms. And then I thought, well, all the publishers I've ever seen say that, so it must be true. Maybe it's not true. So yeah, definitely a research opportunity. I don't think there's been a lot of work on that. And that would be really interesting, just because, and certainly, I mean, the Amazon recommendations are okay sometimes. I think there's some of that satisfying, and, for most of what you need. I mean, I know I sort of laugh about this, but as much as I want to make sure that if I'm telling somebody else something, and, if somebody else asks me a question, I want to go and make sure that I have, and I have it backed up and citations and all of that, and I have that librarian impulse. But if I just want to know, sometimes I'm like, nah, it's fine, that's on Wikipedia, because I'm just curious and it's okay. And I think that there's maybe some of that with the Amazon recommendations. I've been mad at them lately, largely because of Legos, but also because a couple of other times I've been looking for things and their recommendations have been really terrible. But sometimes they're not inaccurate. It's like, oh yeah, I did like those other books. Good job, Amazon. But yeah, definitely a research opportunity because I'm sure that we're better at it. But maybe that's just professional pride.
I'm inclined to agree with you. I've gotten my own version of Lego recommendations. Although in Amazon's defense, I'm not great about going in there and checking, this was a gift and I don't really own this and all that stuff. So it's kind of amusing what they recommend to me sometimes. Let's see. Ed Nordine is curious if you have any thoughts about the Ex Libris BX article recommender service, and should we be doing something more like that?
Okay, this is true confessions time. I am not familiar with it, and I will look for it and I will let you know. But I'm not 100% familiar with it right now. Sorry.
Don't feel bad. I'm not familiar with it either.
Okay, my first thought was, is this an academic library thing that I missed?
I have to turn off your mic or we'll get feedback.
Sorry.
It probably is more of an academic thing, and I actually am at an Ex Libris library, and I wouldn't want to speak about that with any kind of authority. I haven't gotten to read about it a lot yet either, so don't feel bad about that. I'll put it in the list of stuff for later. Let's see. Jonathan McCowan is curious about your thoughts on the other big publishers letting libraries purchase their ebooks. I guess when he says other big publishers, he means other than, I'm blanking on the people who are limiting charges, Harcourt or whoever it was.
Yeah, I mean, there's everybody talks about the big six a lot because they're sort of a bellwether to some extent. What they're doing tends to push the industry. And right now we're down to, Random House, HarperCollins is a 26 arc, and let me think, Hachette used to let us borrow ebooks, have ebooks, and now no. and Simon & Schuster has never let libraries use ebooks. Hachette, it's like the Seven Dwarfs. I have to count every single time. Hachette, Random House, HarperCollins, Penguin, right? Penguin is up in the air. They aren't letting us take new ebooks, but we can keep the old ones that we already had. So, it's really a mixed bag. I mean, we don't have that many of the big 6 publishers, but we do have a lot of, medium-sized and smaller publishers. Oh, Steve, I'm afraid of that. Do you think Random House will start restricting what they offer to libraries soon? The folks that I've met from Random House have been so pro-library and so passionate and so great. It's hard for me to imagine them saying, but they're not, it's a big company. So I don't know. I hope not, and I don't think so, but anything's possible, certainly. But it is an opportunity for smaller publishers, and certainly not everything that we loan or are interested in. I mean, case in point, every single library that has Overdrive is complaining constantly about how they can't keep up with demand, and there's 8 million holds, and oh my God, which, right there tells you clearly we'll do okay with with the smaller and medium-sized publishers. It'll be fine. But, that all, also as we start to get into a more ebook world, what does that mean if we're missing those bestsellers, if we're missing those big ones? One of the things that I always think of, Simon & Schuster published Susan Orlean's latest book, Rin Tin Tin, which was so good. I mean, even if you're not a dog person, just such a good book. And they released an ebook of it that was an enhanced ebook, and I think it has. I've been meaning actually to buy it so I can look at it because I liked it that much that I will buy it twice. And I think it has videos and things like that. And yeah, imagine if we did have access to all of it. And that's something we can't offer our patrons. We can't offer them the enhanced ebook. And if they're sort of primary ebook readers, we can't offer them that book at all. And mostly it just sort of makes me sad that these people might miss that book because I thought it was so good. And I recommend it to a wide range of people. But also, that means that we're sort of dealing in a wholly different market. And, I start thinking about it sometimes, and I can almost imagine like a fragmented sort of, library ebooks, people buying full-priced ebooks, and then people buying the discounted ebooks, and nobody's reading the same things, which is, good and bad. There is that sort of long-tail element to it, but it sort of means that you can't read the other things. It's not just you can get to this long tail. It's, if you're devoted to using only library ebooks, or that's all you can afford, or whatever, then you're just missing out, and that's it. You just don't get these other ones. So I do think, smaller and medium-sized publishers, maybe they're more willing to take a risk on libraries, maybe, or perceived risk on libraries. Maybe they're more willing to work with libraries, just because they are maybe less afraid of the shifting market, or maybe more desperate to keep their name out there. I don't know. But certainly I do think it's an opportunity for those smaller publishers, and it's an opportunity for us to work with a wider variety of publishing houses, so that can be good.
We've got a couple more questions to get in, and we've got about 3 minutes, but they're all from Carol Whitehouse, and they kind of focus on school libraries. She's curious if you have a sense of what publishers are concentrating on in ebooks in school libraries, and also if you know any great children's literature blogs, either by young people or for children. There's a third question, but I won't burden you with all of them all at once.
Okay. I will say I'm not a children's librarian, so the children's blogs for books for children I'm not 100% familiar with, although I know a couple of podcasts. One of them is called Princess Scientist, that's done by a 7-year-old, and the other one, oh God, I'm blanking on his name. It's like, it has a dinosaur name, I forget. And they're both podcasts done by kids. I think they often talk about like what they're reading that week and what they're like learning about and things like that, and they are also super adorable. Yes, Princess Scientist, I love her. I don't listen to it regularly, but every so often I'll listen to pieces of it, and it's completely great. I listened to an interview with her mom, which is how I learned about it. Anyway, yeah, so I'm not, but again, I certainly have children's librarians friends, and I always ask them for stuff like that. School librarians, you know, it's interesting. We have a bunch of school libraries here, and they're not doing a lot with ebooks. And I have friends at school libraries that are, and I know, you know, certainly Buffy Hamilton has talked a lot about lending out for high school students, you know, lending out Nooks and lending out Kindles, and she, you know, when the Kindle program for schools changed, she switched over to Nooks. And for younger kids, I know it does get a little bit trickier. And there was that recent study. There's a lot of conflicting information. I've seen studies that say that children prefer print, and studies that say children prefer ebooks, and a lot of anecdotal evidence saying that when kids are using ebooks, it's like they're watching TV. But I know for a lot of the schools like Pearson and EBSCO and Follett all offer ebooks, and I think it does tend to focus on sort of nonfiction researchy stuff. You know, where everybody does do, where everybody does, you know, sort of sit, you know, do their research at the computers. And my sense, the product websites are kind of difficult. A lot of them I think don't offer remote access even, because it's really just sit at the library and do this work sort of thing, or be at the library and do this work. And I do think that can be really great, although I have talked to some school librarians who have expressed a little bit of trepidation about the, you know, if you build your curriculum around a certain set of ebooks and then a publisher decides to not offer access to that, you know, what do you do? But it is, I mean, school libraries are sort of a whole different deal, because they require simultaneous access in a way that public libraries, I mean, would like but can't necessarily get. And I do think there is, the market there is really, really different. I don't know if that answers your question, though. But that's sort of my gut sense, is that it's different. There's sort of this text, not quite textbooks, but definitely research-oriented, kid-friendly, simultaneous access model. And it's from, you know, companies like Pearson and Follett, although I think a lot of high schools tend to buy individually from publishers when they do buy ebooks. Oh, simultaneous access, meaning more than one kid can use it at once. You know, so you can have a whole class looking at this book at one time, as opposed to with, you know, novels, you know, one person at a time. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. And Carol, if you're interested in the, you know, future of ebooks in education in general, rumor has it Apple's going to be making a big announcement tomorrow about a new approach to the EPUB format and to textbook publishing that's going to be, you know, a big fat hairy deal. So keep your ears out for that. It's a little complex to explain in the minute that we have left. I just wanted to thank everybody so much for their attendance today. We have to kind of wrap it up, but if you have any more questions for Kate, please email them to Sarah or Karen or myself, and let me get our email addresses up on the screen here, and we'll be happy to relay those to her. And again, thank you for your attendance. We hope you enjoyed the session just as much as we did. On this slide, you'll see the URL for the assessment for today's webinars, and we really, really would appreciate it if y'all could take the time to complete the assessment, because we want your feedback. It's very important to us. And as I've mentioned before, we're going to be sending out an email in the next couple of days that will contain links to the assessment and links to request a Georgia Continuing Education Certificate if you need one, and also an archive of today's presentation. So keep an eye out for that. And if you have an idea for a topic or a presenter for future webinars, please let us know, and you can email us at those addresses. Everybody have a great day.